My name is Colin Baxter, and the Christmas that changed everything started with a pot of butter tarts and ended with me signing papers that gave away nearly everything I'd spent 40 years building. But let me back up. I'm 67 years old, retired electrician, 28 years with BC Hydro before my knees started making retirement sound less like a choice and more like a directive. My wife Beverly passed 4 years ago this past March, ovarian cancer. We had 8 months from diagnosis to the end, and in those 8 months she somehow managed to keep her sense of humor, plan 3 future Christmases in her head, and remind me repeatedly that I was a terrible judge of when to add the flour to a root. She was right about that, like she was right about most things. After she was gone, I rattled around our house in Langley for a while. 4 bedrooms, a yard Beverly had planted herself over 30 years, a garage full of tools I'd been meaning to organize since 2009. The kids grew up in that house. There was Darren, my oldest at 42 now, an IT manager out in Burnaby. Then my daughter Kathleen, 39, married to a guy named Jeff who works in commercial real estate downtown. And my youngest, Ryan, 36, who does something in marketing I've never fully understood, despite him explaining it to me at least a dozen times. Beverly and I had always done Christmas big, the real kind. Tree up the first weekend of December, shortbread starting mid-November so the tins could stack up in the pantry, the good tablecloth that came out once a year and had to be ironed the right way or Beverly would redo it herself without saying a word. After she died, I kept it all going, not because I was trying to hold on to her, though maybe some of that too, but because I genuinely believed it mattered. That the table set with her dishes and the smell of tourtière in the oven was something worth preserving. Something that told my grandkids who they were. This past Christmas I started planning in October. 4 grandkids ages 5 to 13, 3 adult children, 3 spouses or partners. Beverly's sister Ruth Ann, who's widowed herself and lives in Abbotsford and would never say no to a Christmas invite. 18 people total. I made a spreadsheet. I know how that sounds, but it helped me keep track of allergies. Kathleen's youngest has a tree nut thing, and who needed what chair height at the table and whether Jeff was still not eating pork. I called the butcher in Fort Langley and put in an order for a standing rib roast and a separate turkey crown for the people who can't commit to beef. I spent something like $580 on that meal. That's a significant portion of my monthly income. My pension from BC Hydro plus CPP and OAS comes out to about $3,200 a month. Not struggling, but not flush either. $580 is nearly a fifth of what comes in. I remember thinking, Beverly would tell me that's too much, and then I'd remind her that she was the one who insisted on real beeswax candles every year, and she'd laugh, and I'd laugh, and that would be that. Except Beverly wasn't there to have that conversation, so I just bought the beeswax candles myself. The week before Christmas, I was deep into prep, shortbread done. Tins lined up, turkey brine started. The rib roast was dry aging in the garage fridge, the way I'd learned from a YouTube channel run by a retired chef in Ontario. My house smelled the way it was supposed to smell that time of year, and I was tired in the good way, the way you get when you're doing something that means something. That's when I found it. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. Darren had set up a family group chat on his phone a few years back and added me to it. We used it for birthday reminders, that sort of thing. On the Wednesday before Christmas, I picked up my phone to message everyone what time to arrive on the 25th, and I had a notification that I'd been added to a new chat. The name of it was something like Baxter Kids Plus Spouses. My first thought was that it was a surprise for me. Maybe they were coordinating gifts. It wasn't that. I don't know how I got added. My best guess is Kathleen meant to forward something to the chat and tapped my name by accident. She called me later that night about something unrelated and sounded normal, so she didn't know. I scrolled up and read from the beginning. The chat went back 6 weeks. Darren, October 14th. Anyone actually planning to do Dad's Christmas this year? Liz's parents are in Kelowna, and she's been hinting about going there for once. Kathleen, same day. God, I've been thinking the same thing. Last year was exhausting. Dad starts texting in November about whether we're doing brunch Christmas Eve, and honestly, it's just a lot. Jeth's family does Boxing Day, and we're always already wiped out. Ryan, Jen and I were talking about this. Her sister's doing a thing in Victoria and we could make a long weekend of it. Dad would understand. Darren, would he though? Remember 2 years ago when I said we might do Christmas Eve at Liz's parents' instead of his, and he went quiet on the phone for like 10 minutes? Kathleen, he does that. Ryan, he definitely does that. Darren, it's not like we don't love him. He's just gotten so heavy since Mom died. Everything is this big emotional production. Last Christmas he cried during the toast. Kathleen, he lost his wife of 35 years. I think he's allowed. Ryan, sure, but the way he sets everything up and then looks at you while you're eating to see if you're having a good time. Like, I feel watched. It's exhausting. Kathleen, I know what you mean, but I still feel bad. Darren, you always feel bad. That's on you. I just want one Christmas where we're not managing his feelings the whole day. I put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again, looked around my kitchen. At the shortbread tins on the counter, at the good tablecloth I'd already ironed and folded over the back of a chair, at the framed photo of Beverly and me at Whistler, 20-some years ago, her laughing at something I'd said, snow in her hair. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I'm not going to tell you I didn't feel it, because I did. I felt it like something physical. Not the words themselves exactly, but the picture they painted of how my children experienced me. As a production, as a burden to manage, as a man they had to get through, rather than someone they actually wanted to spend time with. But here's the thing about being a retired electrician. You spend decades diagnosing problems. You learn not to react to the symptom. You find the fault in the system and you fix it properly, or you don't touch it at all. I kept reading. 3 days later in the chat, Darren again. Okay, so thinking through this, we can't all just not show up? That'll cause a whole thing. What if we each come up with something? Liz and I can say the kids have something on. Kathleen, you could do the stomach bug thing. It's winter. Totally believable. Kathleen, I genuinely hate this. Ryan, I can say Jen's flight from Victoria got cancelled. He won't know. Darren, send the excuses Wednesday evening. Too late for him to talk us out of it or guilt us into coming. We do a makeup brunch in January. Low-key, he'll be fine. Kathleen, and if he's not, Darren, he'll survive. He always does. Mom used to handle him, but we can't be expected to do that forever. We have our own families. Kathleen, okay, fine, but I really hate this. Ryan, you said that. I read that exchange 4 times. Then I closed the app and sat very still in my kitchen while the brine bubbled quietly on the stove and the shortbread tins gleamed on the counter. Mom used to handle him. I turned that sentence over in my head for a long time. I was the kind of husband Beverly had to manage. I was the kind of father my children now had to manage. And not one of them had ever said that to my face, given me the chance to be anything other than that. Just built a whole architecture of management and avoidance around me while I stood in my kitchen making 2 kinds of gravy and ironing the good tablecloth. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd genuinely like to know. I didn't sleep much that night, but I did a lot of thinking, and by morning I had a plan. I kept going. That's the first thing. I finished the prep, the rib roast went into the dry age, the butter tarts got made, my mother's recipe, the runny kind the way Beverly always wanted them, and stacked in tins beside the shortbread. The table got set with Beverly's dishes, all 18 places. with the name cards I'd written by hand in the good pen Kathleen had given me for Father's Day 2 years back. I found it weirdly peaceful, setting places for people I knew weren't coming. Wednesday evening, right on schedule, the texts arrived. Darren, Dad, really sorry. Liz's parents had a fall and we need to be in Kelowna. Can't make it Christmas Day. Rain check for sure. Kathleen, Dad, Mia woke up with a stomach bug this morning. Don't want to risk spreading it around with the little ones there. So sorry. Love you. Ryan. Hey, Dad. Jen's flight from the island got cancelled. Massive storm coming. They're saying it might not clear until the 27th. Don't want her stuck there alone for Christmas. We'll definitely do something in January. I replied to each of them the same way. That's okay. Take care of yourselves. Merry Christmas. Nothing more. No guilt, no long pause on the phone. Just those 2 sentences. I could almost feel them wondering what was wrong with me. That evening I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my old friend George Engemdi, to be formal about it, who ran a community outreach program through St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Langley. George and I had known each other since our boys played hockey together, back when Ryan was 8 and George's son Marcus was terrorizing the opposing net. I asked him if he knew people in the community who might be spending Christmas Day alone and would welcome a home-cooked dinner. He said he'd ask around and get back to me. The second call was to my neighbor Audrey, 74, who'd lost her husband the same year I lost Beverly and who I'd been trading garden vegetables with every summer since. I asked if she was doing anything Christmas Day. She said no, her daughter was in Edmonton and the flight costs were too much this year. I said, come for dinner. The third call I'll get to in a moment. By the time I went to bed Wednesday night, I had 9 confirmed guests for Christmas dinner. Audrey, George and his wife Amara, whose own kids were spending the holiday with Amara's family in Nairobi. A man named Clifford from George's outreach network, 71, Korean War veteran's son, in from a seniors building in Cloverdale. A young couple, Pryor and Marcus, graduate students from Simon Fraser, who'd stayed in BC for Christmas because flights home to Mississauga were $300 each way. A single mother named Denise, with twin boys, 7 years old, who'd moved to Langley from Red Deer the year before and didn't have family close by. Ruth Ann, Beverly's sister, who I hadn't cancelled with because she'd never been part of the original deception plan and deserved to be there. The third phone call had been to a woman named Sandra Whitmore at Global News BC. I'd found her through the station's website. I'd worked with her briefly, years ago, on a community electrical safety feature they were doing for an anniversary special. She remembered me. I told her I was a retired widower who'd spent nearly $600 preparing Christmas dinner for family members who'd all cancelled last minute without telling me until the night before. I asked if he thought anyone would be interested in a story about holiday isolation for seniors and the communities that show up when family doesn't. She called me back in 40 minutes. Said she'd like to send someone Christmas morning. I went to bed. I slept well. Christmas morning I was up at 5:30, which is normal for me. Turkey in the oven by 6:15, rib roast out to rest at room temperature. I made my mother's butter tart filling from scratch. It takes the better part of an hour and put a second batch of shortbread in because I hadn't planned on 9 people, and my mental arithmetic said there might not be enough. I'd already called the butcher about the roast, and he'd set me up with a bigger cut when I'd explained I was expanding the guest list. At 9 o'clock, a woman named Tanis and her camera operator arrived. Tanis was maybe 35, calm, wore a toque the whole time she was inside my house, which I appreciated because it's cold out there and she clearly hadn't taken it off just for TV. She walked through my dining room and filmed Beverly's dishes, the 18-place settings, the name cards. She filmed the kitchen, the roast, the butter tart tins. She asked me about Beverly, about the kids, about how it felt to be spending Christmas Day without family. I told her the truth. I wasn't spending Christmas without family. I just had to expand my definition. She used that. I found out later it ran in the promo. My guests started arriving at 11:30. Audrey came first, with a bottle of BC VQA Red and a container of her shortbread that she apologized for immediately, not knowing I'd made 3 tins myself. I told her the more shortbread the better and meant it. George and Amara arrived together, Amara carrying a pot of jollof rice she'd insisted on making, and which I was not going to argue with. Clifford arrived by taxi, wearing a blazer, standing straight despite the walker. The Simon Fraser students, Priya and Marcus, showed up with a grocery bag that turned out to contain samosas they'd made the night before. Denise and her twins arrived last, the boys wide-eyed at the tree, which I'd decorated with 40 years of ornaments, including the ones the kids had made in elementary school. Macaroni glued to cardboard, with names written in crayon. The smaller one, named Owen, no relation to me, just happened to share a surname, immediately spotted a wooden reindeer ornament on a low branch and asked if he could hold it. I said yes. I said he could hold any of them. By noon, my house was full. Tanis filmed. I almost forgot she was there. George said grace at my request, because his voice carries in a room and because the prayer he said was one Beverly would have liked. About gratitude, not as a feeling, but as a practice. About choosing to see what's here instead of mourning what isn't. Amen, said the room. The food was good. The rib roast came out exactly right. Amara's jollof rice was the best thing on the table, and I told her so, and she laughed and said she'd teach me. Denise's boys had 2 servings of butter tarts each, and then asked Audrey and me approximately 40 questions about the ornaments on the tree, each answer leading to another question, the way it does with 7-year-olds who are genuinely curious and haven't learned yet to pretend they're not. At 2 in the afternoon, Tanis wrapped up. She shook my hand and said it was the best story she'd worked on all year. I said that was kind of her. She said she meant it. My guests left around 4, each one hugging me, Clifford shaking my hand with both of his, Priya asking if she could come back for New Year's. I said I'd think about it. Denise's boys each drew me a quick picture on the back of 2 of the extra place-setting cards. One drew a reindeer, one drew what he told me was a butter tart, but looked more like a yellow moon, and I taped them both to the fridge. I cleaned up, washed Beverly's dishes carefully, wrapped the leftover roast, put the butter tart tins in the pantry, made myself a cup of tea, sat down in the living room. My phone started going at 5:22. The segment had aired, not from my kids, not at first, from people I hadn't heard from in years. Gord Fitzpatrick, who I'd worked with at Hydro for 12 years and lost touch with after retirement. My cousin Bob in Winnipeg, who I call at Christmas and Easter and not much in between. 2 neighbors from the street who'd apparently watched the 6 o'clock news. George's wife Amara texting to say the segment made her cry and it was beautiful. Then at 5:47, Darren called. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. Kathleen texted, Dad, please call me. We saw the news. Please, Ryan, Dad, what the hell? Please call us. I'm sorry, there was a longer one from Kathleen that I read twice and then put the phone face down on the coffee table. I sat with Beverly's photo on the mantel and the 2 crayon pictures on the fridge and the quiet house that still smelled like roast and shortbread and jollof rice, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Not happy, exactly. Settled, like I'd finally stopped trying to be something for people who hadn't been paying attention, and started just being myself. The doorbell rang at 6:30. I looked out the front window before answering. Darren's SUV in the driveway, Kathleen's minivan behind it, Ryan's car on the street. I opened the door, all 3 of them, plus Liz and Jeff and Jen. Kathleen was already crying. Darren had that jaw he gets when he's trying to hold something together and not quite managing. "Dad," Darren started, "we need to explain." I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me. It was cold, the kind of December cold in the valley that isn't dramatic, just steady and certain. I said, "I read the chat. I've known since Wednesday." Kathleen made a sound. I said, "I know what you think of me. I know you find Christmas with me exhausting. I know you've been coordinating excuses for years now, and this one was just more organized than the others." Darren said, "It's not like that." I said, "Then tell me what it's like. I'm listening." He couldn't, not really. None of them could. There was no good version of what I'd read. Kathleen tried. She said they loved me, that it was just stress, that the holidays are a lot when you have kids and jobs and everyone pulling you in different directions. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I know all of that is true. I believe you're stressed. I believe you're stressed. I believe the holidays are hard. What I don't understand is when I became something to be managed instead of someone to come home to." Silence. The oak tree in the front yard Beverly had planted the year Darren was born dropped a few dead leaves onto the driveway. Jeff, Kathleen's husband, the quiet one, who I'd always respected for his steadiness, said quietly, "That's fair, Colin. That's completely fair." Kathleen covered her mouth. I told them I'd made some decisions. The house was going on the market in January. I'd already talked to an agent. The market in Langley was strong, and a 4-bedroom in my neighborhood would sell fast. I was putting my name on the wait list at a place called Willowbrook Commons in Cloverdale, a seniors community, not a care home, active living, a workshop, garden plots, communal dinners twice a week. George had told me about it. I'd visited twice in November and liked how people talked to each other there, like they had somewhere to be and wanted to be there. Darren said, "Dad, this is a big decision to make when you're upset." I said, "I made it in November, before Wednesday." Wednesday just confirmed I was right. I also told them I'd updated my will. I want to be straight with you about what that looked like, because some people hear this kind of story and assume it's all about punishment. It wasn't. It was about being honest for the first time in years about what I actually valued and what I wanted to do with what Beverly and I had built. The house would sell for around $700,000, maybe more. My RRSP and savings came to another $230,000. Life insurance another $100,000. Nearly $1,030,000 in total when you added it up. I divided it this way: 40% to the BC Children's Hospital Foundation, 25% to the Langley Food Bank, where Beverly had volunteered 3 Saturdays a month for 11 years, 20% to establish a scholarship at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Beverly's name for students in the Early Childhood Education Program. She'd always believed teaching small children was the most undervalued work in the country, 10 to St. Andrew's Outreach Program. The remaining 5% split 4 ways among my 3 children and Ruthann. Darren's face went through several things at once. I said, "That's roughly $12,000 each. Enough to matter, not enough to plan around." Kathleen said, "Dad, we don't care about the money." I said, "I know, but I care about where it goes." Ryan, who hadn't said much, said quietly, "Is this because of one Christmas?" I said, "No. It's because of years of feeling like something to be managed. It's because of the chat, yes, but also because of every time I called and got voicemail and a text back 6 hours later, every time I tried to make plans and got maybe instead of yes, every time I could feel you counting down until you could leave. This Christmas just put words to something that was already there." Les, Darren's wife, who I'd always liked even when things were tense, said, "For what it's worth, Colin, Darren talked about it at home too. He'd say the holidays were hard and I'd ask why, and he'd say he didn't know. I think he does know and just didn't know how to say it to you." Darren looked at the driveway. didn't confirm or deny. I said, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to show you something. I'm trying to show you something. I'm not the man you have to manage. I never was. I'm a person who spent 35 years married to the best woman I ever knew, and then spent 4 years trying to stay connected to the family we built together. And somewhere in there, I stopped noticing that it was only me trying. Kathleen was crying properly now. Ryan had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the oak tree. I said, if you want to be part of my life going forward, I want that too. But I want to be wanted, not accommodated. There's a difference, and I think you know what it is. Darren said, can we come back tomorrow? Can we talk more? I said, I have pottery at 10. But after that, yes. I went inside. I made myself another cup of tea. I sat with Beverly. I signed up for the pottery because a woman at Willowbrook Commons mentioned it when I toured the facility in November. The instructor was 68 herself, a retired landscape architect named, and this will sound made up, but it's not, a woman whose hands were covered in clay and who laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which Beverly used to do too. I was bad at it from the first session. My cylinders collapsed. My handles fell off. I laughed more in 2 hours than I had in months. I moved to Willowbrook in early March. Got a good price on the house. Kept Beverly's favorite chair, her china, the photo from Whistler, the ornament collection. Donated everything else to a combination of the Langley transition house and 2 of Denise's friends who were setting up apartments for the first time. My kids adjusted, each in their own way and at their own speed. Darren came by the Saturday after Christmas with his 2 older kids, without being asked. We went for a walk along the Nickelmeckle and talked for 2 hours about things we'd never talked about Beverly's death and how it had scared him. Not just as grief, but as a preview, as a reminder that I was mortal too and that he didn't know how to face that. I told him I understood that. I told him the solution wasn't to hold me at a distance. It was to talk to me. He said he knew. He said his therapist had been telling him the same thing for 3 years. I said, is that who told you adult children aren't responsible for their parents' emotional well-being? He looked at me, said, you read that part. I said, I read all of it. He said, I'm sorry, Dad. I'm genuinely sorry. I believed him. I still do. Kathleen came with the kids in late January, the girls in tow, and we baked in the Willowbrook community kitchen. Shortbread, Beverly's recipe, the girls decorating with too much colored sugar the way kids always do. Kathleen told me she was seeing someone herself now, a counselor, working through what she called her avoidance patterns. She said she'd spent 4 years being angry at herself for not visiting more and managing that guilt by visiting even less, and she was starting to understand the loop. I told her I was proud of her for seeing it. She held on to me for a long time when she left. Ryan took the longest. He's the quietest of the 3, always has been. Processes things on a timeline you can't push. But in February, he and Jen drove out to Willowbrook on a Sunday morning and we played cards for 4 hours and ordered pizza. Jen told me she'd never known how to talk to me, that I'd always seemed to be waiting for something from her that she couldn't identify, and she'd coped by keeping her distance. I said I thought that was probably fair, that grief makes people hard to read. She said she was glad we were trying. I said me too. Audrey and I kept having coffee. The drives along the Fraser. The garden plots at Willowbrook weren't ready until spring, but she promised to bring cuttings from her yard. George and Amara came for dinner at least twice a month. Clifford and I played cribbage on Tuesday afternoons, which he took extremely seriously, in the way of someone who had been playing cribbage for 60 years and did not intend to lose to anyone. Denise's boys sent me a Valentine's card. It had a drawing of a butter tart on it, recognizably a butter tart this time. The Beverly Baxter Early Childhood Education Scholarship at Quantlim awarded its first recipient in April. A young woman named I have permission to use her name Priya, the same Priya who'd been at my Christmas table, who'd brought samosas from scratch and asked questions about the ornaments with the same attention as the 7-year-olds. She hadn't known about the scholarship when I'd invited her to dinner. She'd applied to Kwantlen in January, chosen early childhood education after volunteering at a daycare through her graduate program, and been awarded it by a selection committee who didn't know her. When she called me to tell me, she cried. I told her Beverly would have found that very satisfying. In May, all 4 of my kids came to the ceremony at Kwantlen. We sat together. Darren had his arm around Liz. Kathleen was on her phone for about 3 minutes and then put it away and didn't take it out again. Ryan and Jen held hands. Priya gave a short speech about her grandmother, who had taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Punjab and who she'd always wanted to honor. Afterward, we went to a restaurant on the water in New Westminster, 12 of us at a big table. My grandkids fought over who sat next to me, and I let them work it out themselves. My oldest grandchild, Darren's 13-year-old, asked about my pottery. Asked if he could come try it sometime. I said yes. I said any time. Darren raised his glass. He said he wanted to say something. He said he was sorry for what happened at Christmas and for what had been happening for longer than that, and he was grateful I hadn't let it be the end, and that the scholarship, the way I'd used what I had to do something that mattered, it reminded him of who his parents were and who he wanted to be. To Mum, he said. To Beverly, said the table. I looked at my children, imperfect and trying, at my grandchildren growing up faster than seems possible, at Audrey across from me, who'd lost the same kind of love I'd lost, and who understood the particular math of rebuilding a life after that. I looked at Priya, who would teach children their first songs and letters, and carry Beverly's name with her into classrooms I'd never see. To family, I said, the one you're born with and the one you find. May we always know when we're taking each other for granted and always find our way back before it's too late. That's the part that matters, I think. Not the will, not the news segment, not the empty chair at a Christmas table. What matters is the finding your way back. The deciding that the people who stumbled are still worth the trouble of being known. That you are still worth the trouble of being known. I'm 67 years old. I wake up in a 2-bedroom apartment that smells like coffee and wood shavings from the workshop downstairs. I have photographs of Beverly in every room and a butter tart recipe I've made so many times I no longer need to look at it. I have a cribbage partner who accuses me of cheating, though I never do. I have a community that showed up when my family couldn't, and a family that's slowly learning to show up too. I'm not waiting for anyone's approval. I'm not counting down the days to the next holiday and hoping no one has an excuse this time. I'm just living, in the fullest sense of the word, in a life I had to build from the wreckage of the one I thought I had. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in Robert, not in the father, in the children, I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying it because it's not too late. Pick up the phone. Don't wait for Christmas. Don't wait for the news segment. Just call. And if you're the parent, the one who's been ironing the good tablecloth and watching the door, you already know what I'm going to say. Your worth is not measured by how many place settings get filled. Set the table for yourself first. That's what Beverly always knew, and it only took me 4 years and 1 ruined Christmas to figure out she was right about that too. There's a pot of butter tarts cooling on my counter right now, and I keep thinking about the version of me who made them 2 Christmases ago. Flour on my shirt, shortbread tins stacked on the counter, name cards written in my good pen for people who'd already decided not to come. That man was doing everything right by the wrong measure. He was keeping score with love, counting place settings as proof that he mattered, and wondering why he kept coming up short. What I understand now, sitting in a 2-bedroom apartment with Beverly's chair in the corner and Clifford's cribbage board on the table, is that I'd confused being needed with being valued. They're not the same thing. I'd spent 4 years after Beverly died trying to be indispensable to my children, filling every holiday with enough food and tradition and careful preparation that they'd have to notice, have to feel it, have to stay, and the harder I tried, the more they pulled back. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect, plain and simple. When you build your worth around other people's attendance, you teach them that your happiness is their responsibility. Eventually, that weight becomes too much to carry. Darren wasn't wrong that something was off. He was wrong about the solution. The answer to a father who was drowning in loneliness wasn't to stop visiting, it was to say something honest. But that takes a kind of courage most of us don't practice until we're forced to, and none of us were practicing it. Not him, not me. I was performing contentment and hoping they'd see through it. He was performing normalcy and hoping I wouldn't notice. We were both, in our own way, avoiding the harder conversation. What changed things wasn't the news segment, though that's the part of the story that gets told. What changed things was that I stopped asking to be seen and started actually being myself. Booking the pottery class in November, putting my name on the wait list at Willowbrook before Christmas even happened, calling George about dinner guests instead of waiting by the phone. I stopped building a table and hoping they'd sit at it. I just started living, and living turned out to be the most honest thing I could do. Integrity, I've decided, isn't just about telling the truth to other people. It's about being honest with yourself about what you need and then actually doing something about it instead of ironing the tablecloth and hoping for the best. The clearest thing I did in all of this wasn't the will or the house sale. It was the moment I read that group chat, and instead of confronting them or collapsing, I made a plan. I used what I knew. I thought it through. That steadiness, finding it when everything in you wants to react, is something you build over a lifetime, and I'm grateful I had enough of it left. And the sticking with it after, not changing the will when Darren apologized, not moving back to the house because it was comfortable, staying with the decision even when it cost me something, even when Kathleen cried on my porch and part of me wanted to take it all back. That's the part nobody tells you about setting boundaries. The boundary isn't the hard part. The hard part is the morning after, when the people you love are hurting and you have to trust that the thing you did was still right. It was. I know that now. Not because it ended well, though it did, but because I stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing myself. That's the only version of this story that could have had a good ending. Beverly knew that. She knew it 30 years before I figured it out. I just needed one empty table and a pot of butter tarts to catch up.